Mhm.
Now, often, my observation of people who call themselves sensitive people is there are two types. There are basically people who have a sensitivity that's natural to them, and there are people who have a sensitivity which is incurred as a result of growing up in some kind of abusive situation where they were constantly either bombarded with something or abused or unable to feel safe. Here's the news, folks. The news is there's no place of safety. Safety, security, those are some of the myths of Western civilization. Make enough
I'm
money.
Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. This week on the Poetry of Predicament podcast, we welcome back Dr. Peter Nelson, who's a substantial practicing psychologist in Australia. And for the purposes of our conversation here, even more importantly, he is a long-standing seer, someone who sees in unusual ways, has a remarkable ability to perceive what others often cannot. So let's welcome Dr. Peter Nelson. All right, we have just started up the recorder for this episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, and I am so glad to see you again, Dr. Peter Nelson. We've just, before turning on the recorder, got to hear about how your recent recovery from surgery is going, and that has been kind of painful for you. And I'm very sorry to hear that part. But
Oh, that part's over now, so we can forget it.
I'm so glad that you're well enough to be here with us, and really glad to be talking with you again. And again, I can kick myself for just not turning on the recorder at the very beginning always with you. But in any case, I was just letting you know an area of conversation that would be very much of interest to me is to find out a seer's point of view about how humans best can establish trust with one another, rapport with one another, connection with one another. Because my experience is, and I believe I've heard you and others who are far more established seers by a long shot, speaking about some of the energetics or some of the non-ordinary experiences that you could speak of directly about those intimate connections, and why I have that particular focus is because here we are in October of 2023, and it's only been about 6 months that AI, artificial intelligence, has been really in the mainstream sphere, and it's just been exploding, and that's part of its feature set, but it's also part of the possibly extraordinarily damaging feature set as well, that it just learns like no human being ever has or perhaps ever will. And its ability to learn and expand itself and then share that knowledge in network form with other AIs around the world. These
But what is it learning?
Well,
What is
we'll get there in terms of the distinctions. In fact, there are many, myself included, who would not call it intelligence at all. That it's actually just massively fast and expansive uh, artificial
statistical calculator?
accelerated information processing and problem solving, and sure, to be sure, but let me just give out the rest of the kind of motivation for this is one of the pundits I've been listening to, for quite a while, but particularly recently, is Yuval Noah Harari, who is no computer expert himself. He's no AI expert, but what he's gleaned from what's already happened is that it's already happening, that AI promises to predate our ability to be intimate with one another, that the skill set and the ability to learn how to create rapport with virtually anyone within moments, within seconds, from an AI bot, if you will, a presence, is terrifying. It's already able to be far more in relationship and at depth than virtually anybody we now know. It's
I would argue that that's not true at all.
great. Well, I don't
That's
know
not
about it all
happening,
either.
actually.
Let's have some spicy
Yeah.
conversation then. The main thing I want to just express to let people know why we're even, on this thread is, that's been my experience at the attention level, when our attention was being predated 24/7, and still is. There's no question. That's just as bold and more bold than ever. But now that it's gone to this next level of the AI systems being able to learn and expand their ability to then learn and further learn and expand the network of that learning to include how human beings create rapport is it's just devastating from my
Yeah.
point of view. And
Okay.
so let's just take it from there. It looks like you're ready to go.
Okay. I am. First of all, remember, if you will, or conjure up the picture, if you will, of us as early human hominids walking across the veldt somewhere in Africa. And a lion jumps out from behind the underbrush and grabs one of us. We're being predated, right?
Yep.
And there's no off switch where you just poke the side of the lion and it stops and he falls off and disappears.
Right. Yeah.
There is an off switch. It's whether you want to choose to use it. You can't be predated by AI because there's an off switch. There are a series of off switches. One is don't get on social media. Everyone thinks it's a FOMO situation, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
You're not missing anything. There's nothing there to be missed. A. B. There is no intimacy between you or anyone else in AI. It simulates it, but it's not intimacy because it's not artificial intelligence. It's machine intelligence. It's not artificial human intelligence because human intelligence requires body and emotions. And AI has no body and no emotions. And even though it can simulate at times something that reminds us of emotion, if I put you in front of a human being doing what the AI does, but genuinely, and the AI, you would tell immediately there's something different about the two of them. Even though the AI is presented to you as an avatar that looks just like the actual person in the room. So when we start talking about how it's predating our attention, it's not, because there's an off switch. We couldn't, when we were originally, basically the objects of predation, there was no off switch. But now we act like prey animals, even though all we have to do is reach over and pull the plug out of the wall. And the real question is, why aren't we doing it? And then to address your idea that like we've lost some kind of capacity to relate, I think that capacity to relate was lost when we got out of original small group living groups, whether they be hunter-gatherers or people just, camping long term in a spot in the forest. We lost that ability when we went into the cityscape. That disappeared. What we have to find out is how to do that real connection with other humans again. And when we do AI or supposed AI, I call it, MI, machine intelligence. When we do that, we'll notice that machine intelligence is a kind of funny imitation of that. Although it has some of the qualities, it doesn't have what a seer would say is the number one quality, which is an energetic interchange, which is the effect of your field on my field and the interchange that takes place at that level. That's just not there. I've been involved on and off with machine intelligence since the 1960s. When I was writing software for Bolt, Beranek, and Newman. These are acoustical engineers, and their main office was in the Boston area. And I was working there as a computer programmer. I was working on what was then called the PDP-1. It was a small mainframe computer. And it had a version of Program Eliza on it. And someone said, oh, it does imitates like a Rogerian psychotherapist. And I said, oh, that'd be fun. And so I played with it. It was easy to kind of trip it up after a while, to get it sort of caught in a loop with you. But it did do a very good imitation of someone who is listening and reflecting in a very basic way.
Right.
But it never went anywhere, except that there were trivial conclusions it would come to. It would say, oh, well, then this means you must really hate your father, or something like that.
Right.
And but this has been around for a long time. Now, the mathematical models that now are being used to do it are much more sophisticated, but they're still basically language models that are using massive amounts of data and very sophisticated statistical calculations to decide what word goes next. And this is how they work. Intimacy or energetic exchange has nothing to do with what it's doing.
Right.
But it can simulate something that can, like if you were in a play, almost lead you to feel, oh, well, that is going on. If you get enough into role, even though you don't really hate the character in front of you that you're arguing with, and part of you is watching from the outside, so to speak, just observing yourself, self-observing, and playing, but at the same time, you're in the role, so you're doing it, but a part of you knows this isn't for real. And if you develop that kind of, how should I say, self-reflective consciousness, you'll know everything you're doing with AI or MI is not for real. Real being what actually happens in a genuine, energetically connected interaction. The words, we're so used to letting language and ideas drive our sense of what's going on. We forget that we're just looking at a roadmap, not the territory. This is Korzybski. The roadmap is not the territory. Now, also, when we're doing this, we're actually, engaging in an abstract fantasy. And this is why at my 80th birthday party, I declared philosophy is dead and I'm not going to pay attention to it anymore. Because really, philosophy is basically a game of abstract verbalizations or abstract ideas through language. I mean, it was Wittgenstein who initially pointed that out toward the end of his philosophical life.
Mm,
And I would say that the problems of being alive in the world, which is what philosophy originally set out to deal with, what's real and what's going on in the world, how do we live in the world, how do
yeah,
we know what we know, those things are not answered by creating abstract notions of how it works. They're answered by a direct engagement where our knowing is actually something that we're experiencing in a very direct way. But we have to learn how to do that because our whole education system has denied that whole part of us and has kept us in the dark about it. And of course, the enculturation we go through in family, in school,
right,
is all about how to survive and succeed in the world
right.
as it was understood by those around us. And I say those skills are all very useful, but what was that line from Leonard Cohen? You make me forget so very much. And that's what the education system has done. It makes you forget so very much of what you might have known as a child. I can't say for certain you did, but you might have known as a child. But you certainly, if you really paid attention, if you allowed the education system as presented to really steal your attention, then you move into a space where gradually you lose all memory that there was something else to attend to.
Right.
And I'm about what else there is to attend to.
Hmm.
I'm really enjoy attending to the ideas of the verbal, written world. I really enjoy that. I enjoy the world of ideas, but I
Mm,
see it as something to play with. They're like toys.
right.
And then there's real life. Okay, you want to respond to that? You've had
Yeah, yeah, I do. I appreciate that you've distinguished this notion of energetic exchange, and so I'd like to kind of go in there, but I'd like to add a couple of terms. I know I've mentioned in earlier conversations my appreciation for a body of work made by Dr. Iain McGilchrist in his massive body of work in which he has researched what got us into this individual and collective predicament that we're in. And what he's basically come up with is that there's an imbalance in which hemisphere is really in charge of me personally and of us collectively. And his assertion is that the left hemisphere is out of control. It's running the show on this planet, and it is the almost singular force that has us be self-terminating. This is what's taking us down.
I think it essentially that's correct, but the way he's saying it leads to a complete wrong idea of what has to be done. Because uh, who do you have an idea of being in charge of your own brain?
Can I just ask you to hold that thought for a second? Because there's
Sure.
just one more piece that I'd like to distinguish about the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, which, by the way, he never once says that what we need to do is just have that right hemisphere only, get the
No,
left
no,
hemisphere
no.
out of here. Um, but he does say what the left hemisphere needs to be doing is be in service of the superior right hemisphere. And
Mhm.
it's the right hemisphere that tends to, he calls it the implicit. And I borrowed that term because I just very much experience it in my body and in my relationships. And the left hemisphere, which again is the one that's in control around the world and causing so much trouble, it is really fixated on the explicit. Everything that
Mm.
you were pointing at before about social media and the externalization of our agency and what where we deploy our attention, where we give our agency, where and what we give our agency away to. So I just wanted to bring in the implicit and the explicit because it seems
Yeah,
like there's very little seeing to be done when the entire fixation of the attention is on the explicit. It
yeah.
seems like
So
that's a shallow,
I think, okay, I
yeah,
got it. But I think there's a problem with talking about it that way.
okay.
First of all neuroscience says now the right left hemisphere division is only part of the picture. It's also opposing bottom up awareness and top down. Top
Hmm.
down is sort of shaping the world to what you already know. Bottom up is, kind of something new emerging. And then it's not just that. Then there's the emotional limbic brain and
Hmm.
how it interacts with the prefrontal cortex, the executive brain.
Hmm.
So all these things work together. The executive brain is taking all its, worldview from the linguistic brain, which is what you would call the left. Of course, in some people, it's reversed. It's, left is right and right is left. So that's why I think it's better to pay attention to it phenomenologically. The noticing the verbal discursive brain as
Hmm.
opposed to the intuitive direct knowing brain.
Which
And that,
he does extensively.
okay, yeah,
Yeah.
good. But then how to use those together, how to, uh, put one in service of the other.
Hmm.
Sometimes sticking with his metaphor of right and left, sometimes the left brain does have to give the right brain some instructions because the right brain can tend to go into fantasy land.
Hmm.
Whereas very often the right brain really needs to inform the left brain about what's authentic, because the left brain can easily hear someone's words and think they're authentic, and meanwhile, what's emanating energetically from the person is something else entirely.
Right.
So the reason I say we should stay away from the brain metaphor is that the
Hmm.
brain metaphor gets us thinking about we have this thing in our head that's out of control and what can we do about it? And from that point of view, nothing, because you can't actually go and start turning switches on and off in your brain or
Hmm.
determining how much information crosses the corpus callosum from the right to the left hemispheres.
Right.
So the thing to do is to pay attention to how you're knowing the world.
Hmm.
And to notice there are at least two ways you're knowing the world. One is a kind of a categorical way, a linguistic categorization. Whether you're doing it visually, you're breaking things visually into that, or auditory, or you're breaking your feelings into different categories. For instance, the trouble with modern psychiatry, it's tried to totally do a left brain analysis of how people behave to determine whether they're mentally ill or not. And and because we create these categories, we believe in them and we use them, and they shape our perception. Lots of studies over the years have shown that how you what language you speak even determines the world you see around you.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, there was a great study done at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century by an amateur linguist named Benjamin Lee Whorf. And he, in some ways, well, he had as a hobby, he was interested in exotic languages like Hopi and Shawnee.
Mhm.
And these languages had no dictionaries which translate English to Shawnee or Shawnee to English. And he studied that and he did that. And he noticed that there was some very major, if you found an original Shawnee speaker who wasn't, basically either, corrupted by the European languages that came in, but just was a traditional Shawnee speaker, they actually parsed the world differently. Even the number of colors of the rainbow that they saw were different.
Mhm.
They could differentiate as many hues as we can, but they saw 3 bands of color, not 7.
Mm.
So, and if you look at the rainbow, you could say, yeah, you could see that.
Mhm.
But if your language labeling system is teaching you from the beginning that this is what's there, 7, well, you'll see 7.
Mhm.
But if you're teaching you it's 3, you'll see 3. The most interesting part of his work was he pointed out that in Shawnee, 2 sentences, I throw a rock into the water and I push a man's head back with my hand, are almost identical. And
Mm.
and that's because Shawnee is a better language for physics, because what it's actually saying is 2 forces meet at a plane: rock, water, head, hand.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you could see that's a different way of conceptualizing it.
Yeah.
You're not looking at force and motion as the primary points of focus. You're looking at, in the English speaker, you're looking at heads and hands and rocks and water, more the object end of it rather than the force or motion end of it.
Um,
So, what I'm really getting to is that uh, the use of language, as you pointed out, in some ways has really corrupted us. The use of language has also corrupted us in the sense of turning off part of our innate capacity to be aware of the world.
mhm.
On the other hand, it's been very useful for building civilizations. And it's also very useful for, communicating important things to members of our local tribe. By the way, the deer are out over there. If we want to get to them, we better leave soon, which is best done with language rather than just sitting there and emoting a feeling about it.
Yeah.
So uh, I want to change the discourse entirely. I want to get away from talking about artificial intelligence.
Okay.
Anyway, AI was first used as an acronym for artificial insemination, and that's where it should stay. And it's machine intelligence. It's not artificial human intelligence, because the artificial means it's doing us, but artificially without a human brain.
Mhm.
No, it's not doing us. It's doing something we do, and it's doing it better probably than we do it usually. But it's only one aspect of what we do.
Mhm.
And even though we've made it the most important aspect, I claim it's important, but there's something else equally important. Okay, I'll have a break here if you want to have a go.
Good. Thank you. That was a great segue, and that's where I consider us 3/4 of the way into what I hope you're going to do is bridge us from your previous kind of track to what you've been calling energetic exchange, which is what I'm assuming is the neighborhood that you're describing, that is these other dimensions of the human experience that are just not possible for AI to do because it doesn't have a body and it doesn't have feelings.
Right.
Yeah. And
Uh, as I said, it could emulate a body through controlling a robot, but that's not a felt body.
Mhm.
Because even if you send feedback signals back into the AI system, you're doing it from basically the model of this kind of statistical linguistic constructive model, or if you're constructing images, same thing. Okay, so what I say you really need to do is learn how to pay attention to kind of what else is going on between human beings. And
Mhm.
here's something you could do. Uh, if you have a computer sitting on your table, you could back up across the room and walk toward the computer slowly.
Mhm.
You know, doesn't matter what's on the screen or anything, just you walk toward it slowly. Uh, from the start to the finish, the only thing you'll really feel is different is the size of the computer in your visual field.
Mhm.
It will appear bigger. Now, if you, let's say you take a human being, particularly some human being, uh, well, any human being, and you put them across the room from you and you walk slowly toward them, they get bigger too in your visual field. But
Mhm.
when you get to a certain point near them, it feels different.
Mhm.
Uh, you don't feel different getting near the computer. It may be like you feel nervous, you're too close to the person, or you feel like, they're kind of, you're getting a feeling about being near them makes you uncomfortable. Uh, and that's kind of a secondary knowing to what's really going on. And so, with what's really going on, is that we each, as a human being, have what I call a biofield around us.
Mhm.
We have an energetic presence, which is not electromagnetic, or it may have an electromagnetic component, but a computer is an electromagnetic device, really. So you're walking up close to it, and if it's putting out a strong RF field, that might affect your body. But there won't be an interpersonal sense of felt either attraction or repulsion or unease that we feel as we enter into someone else's field,
Mhm.
because uh, that's kind of our private space. How many of us have the feeling of, some people seem to know where there's a good boundary where you don't get closer to a person than, let's say, 3 feet or 4 feet. Some people really understand that and they make room for others. Others
Mhm.
don't, we notice, and we find them annoying
Mhm.
because they're in our field. When you walk up to your computer with the AI bot on the screen, it doesn't get annoyed about you getting close to it. We could probably program it to simulate that, but that's not part of its basic functioning. It's not a part of its basic intelligence and capacity to know or to understand. So we have to differentiate all the time between what's directly known phenomenologically as felt, directly experienced knowledge, and what's knowledge that's basically uh, been simulated. And uh, so what we're doing is we're doing something that herd animals do with this whole AI business. You know, when sambar deer in the jungle or the forest of East India uh, hear a crackling in the underbrush, they go into alert,
Mhm.
right? And if there's any real movement there, they all take off. That part of the brain in mammals never went away. We
Mhm.
react, we go into alert, when certain signals are said to us. And one is a verbal picture of something which is dangerous. Yeah, so AI, there's lots of speculation about how dangerous AI is. It's as dangerous as it has a power supply, I say. If you turn off the power supply, there's no AI. So we have, with the human being, we have to kill the whole machine to stop the person.
Mm-hmm.
But with a computer, well, I can just take the memory chip out of it. It's not going to do anything. Or I can, basically pull the plug out of the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I want to turn it back on, I can stick the memory chip back in and re-plug it back. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we have to realize that we're being activated like a herd of deer by the discussion of AI. I remember this discussion was taking place in 1999 when the world was going to end because all the internal clocks
Mm-hmm.
inside, computer chips were designed only to go to the end of 1999. And then they reset and planes were going to fall out of the sky. Now, it was a much smaller thing, but we, as a herd, many of us were going around saying, the sky is falling. We became chicken licking and went around screaming, the sky is going to fall. Partly because we're giving whatever it is that we're having a herd reaction to, we're giving it the power by acting as if it's really going to kill us. And there are things that would really kill us, like, a bunch of tanks coming at us and shooting. Yeah, you want to run away.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we're really thinking clearly here. And although I really like Harari and a lot of his thinking, I think he's being histrionic. And I think a lot of people who are prognosticating about machine intelligence are being histrionic. And they're not actually dealing with what is, they're dealing with the imagined rustling in the underbrush. And it's causing that part of our brains that go into, alert mode, to go into alert mode. And then because we're human beings and we can tell ourselves stories, we get a lot of paranoid stories. And I think about it, paranoia as plus or minus, or negative or positive paranoia.
Mm-hmm.
Negative paranoia is great danger, run, run. Positive paranoia is, oh, it's going to solve all my problems, grab it. But it comes from the same part of our functioning, that we're either looking for safety, or we're running from danger, or we're looking for pleasure, or we're trying to avoid pain.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to stop and rethink about what's going on with machine intelligence. First of all, we have to recognize it as machine intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
It is not simulating a human being. It's simulating one aspect of what human beings do.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of objectified, discursive, categorizing and creating objects in the world, whether they're drawings or essays or whatever, or music. We're creating things in the world using a certain kind of capacity. But that's not really the full picture of human intelligence. If we leave out direct emotional knowing, direct body knowledge, direct body sensation, because we're not just a brain in our skulls, that whole body is a brain.
Mm-hmm.
A whole lot of it, the wiring comes together in your head and in your spinal cord, but the whole body is that. And including the autonomic nervous system is part of it, the parasympathetic system, the sympathetic system. So, it would be good if you're, worried about your attention being grabbed too much, turn off your social media. that's a lion who has an off switch. Unlike predators of the past, there was no off switch. There is an
Mhm.
off switch on this one,
Mhm.
and then pay attention to what it's like to be in the presence of other human beings.
Yeah.
Not what they're saying, not what they're wearing, not what they're doing, just the change in feelings you have as you walk up and get closer to another human being. Your feeling state changes
Mhm.
and you pay attention to that. And that's what you need to learn to pay attention to. If you do that, it'll open a whole new world for you or anyone else in terms of what's available to know about another person. And if you want to screw up an AI machine, a so-called AI machine, just, start a conversation with it and then say, well, how am I feeling? And it'll want to ask you questions or it'll hypothesize,
Mhm.
but it won't be able to tell you, like, if you're, let's say you have a partner of X number of years, they'll answer that question without you telling them anything. How am I feeling? They have to pay attention first, of course.
Mhm.
But if they pay attention, they go, oh, what happened today? Or they'll even say that before you walk in the house and your
Mhm.
partner says, oh, what happened?
Right.
Even though uh, you might have a very neutral expression on your face. You may just
Mhm.
walk in the way you usually do.
Yeah.
But we have the capacity for that kind of knowing, but we've minimized its importance and pushed it aside in our educational systems.
Mhm.
And now AI is the ultimate product, or what they're calling AI, called MI, is the ultimate product of that educational system. Something that can write an essay in 5 seconds.
Right.
Isn't that wonderful?
And deals
Of course,
exclusively on the explicit and not at
right,
all
right.
with the
In
implicit
the,
that you're describing right now.
yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and it's very good at that, and that's useful, except of course, it makes shit up all the time. They call it, AI hallucinating.
Mhm.
And it's not hallucinating, it's just constructing along the particular statistical model it has. And that seemed to work as a statistical model. So it was handed to you.
Yeah.
And they're finding more and more people who use the AI model. Well, even references or supposed research has been made up by AI.
Mhm.
It just will make up a research paper and even
Yeah.
name it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I think I've beaten that one to death.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I wouldn't say beat to death, but you've given us a good kind of a sense of a field we could explore a bit, a meadow, so to speak, that we could explore together a bit more. And I'd like to, it's funny, but I do have some kind of spicy, not disagreements, but just some other ways of other
Go
takes
for it.
on a couple of things that you've described. And I'm not sure that that's a really valuable way to use our time. I would be really interested if you have any more um, language that you could share, because I don't, I think our default human operating system as it currently is in the world, we don't have much of a shared language for those inner workings of intimacy that you were just describing, like the partner that knows the other so well that they just walk in the first 10 seconds that they walk into the kitchen, the the partner knows, okay, what happened? Or
Well,
whatever, you know.
what happened, from the way if you want me to conceptualize it, this my
Oh,
concept, my
but
verbal conceptualization, yeah, it's not. what happened, but I
But by
can
the way,
conceptualize it.
I meant what happened is what the partner says within 5 seconds of
Right,
the person walking
right,
in saying, okay, what happened today that has you so completely depressed? I haven't seen you this
right,
way in a long time, and so
right,
on. Just kind of pulling on the thread you were talking about earlier.
right.
And so
Okay, sorry.
so what I'm curious about is any other portion of this exploring the meadow, where we can articulate for folks who are kind of new to this exploration, what are some
No, we don't
other,
want to articulate for them. We don't. We want them to go do something and
okay,
experience it.
that's exactly
That's
what,
why I declared philosophy dead. It articulates everything and creates abstractions that
right.
are not the life we live.
So okay, back down, buddy, back down. Because I'm actually responding to the exercise that you suggested that is very much in real-time practice. And that
Mm.
is, you have two people in a room and one of you walks closer and closer to the other, and you both notice what is energetically present for you at each step forward. I think that's
You
a
notice that things change for you,
yeah, yeah.
not just in the simple thing of walking up to an object and naturally in your visual field, it gets
Hmm.
larger.
Hmm.
Yeah, forget that. But, or maybe you see the colors better. But
Hmm.
forget that. All that, ignore that, because, yeah, that's one thing we pay attention to, but we need to pay attention to something else that only happens when we walk up to another living thing.
Hmm.
Some people will notice it walking up to a tree. Some people
Yes,
will notice it walking up to their dog,
yes.
or when their cat lands on their lap. Partly they're having a response of, association of pleasure,
Hmm.
but partly there's something. If I just put a nice soft toy on your lap, it wouldn't feel the same as your cat, even if the toy could move and make some nice purring sounds.
Yep, yep.
It wouldn't actually feel the same. I'm just trying to get people to notice the difference.
Yeah,
What is the difference?
yeah. And we're very much in the territory that I'm leaning into to offer in my own practices, and then offer it as a menu choice for people who are in the more advanced stages of the progression of this work in living resilience. And that is, if we start in the earliest phases of that kind of learning that you're talking about, it's our our city has just been hit by a hurricane, and we're with 50 other families in the high school gym and huddled together, just trying to, because our neighborhood is destroyed. And we, at the most primitive level, then we need to self-regulate, and we need to co-regulate. We need to be able to calm ourselves down into being able to be present with one another instead of being in shock. And
Mm,
so that's the kind of the first, often the first impetus to learn about what it is to
mm.
connect with another person and pay
Yeah, it's an
attention.
impetus to learn, but you're a bit late because when you're thrown into such an intense situation, it's like, they say, well, you have very high blood pressure and you've been,
Mhm.
fretting your whole lifetime.
Right.
Why don't you take up meditation now? May or may not work, might be a little late.
Believe me, you're right on track with that progression as I lay it out for folks, because most people don't do the meditation practice. They don't have much of a skill set to stand on. So the folks who then get into some amount of recovery from the hurricane, and they're building back, and the father of the family could make a promise to himself, like, that's the last time I'm that unprepared. I was in shock. I was not able to help my own family. That's crazy. So he does take on a contemplative practice and a few other kind of basic skills. And so there are other words besides self-regulation and co-regulation. Then there's as they start to expand their skill set there, they could start to notice there's a coherence, like there's a more nuance available in how they're seeing when their family sits down in their circle every other night when they have their little get-togethers. They realize they started out with a little contemplative practice, and they can start to really feel one another and start to get those distinctions like you were talking about with the couple that knows each other so well. And then the kind of the upper end of that part of the practice could be called attunement, which is, I think, what you're talking about. And if you would be willing to say a little bit more about, because when you're talking about a seer, you're talking about somebody who has some distinctions in how they're
Right.
deploying their attention and what they're
Yeah.
deploying their
Well,
attention toward.
you have to, first of all, you have to learn the basics.
Mhm.
And so the exercise of noticing the difference, is useful. Another useful exercise uh, is, well, it's difficult to say at this point, but I would just say uh, to learn basic attention redeployment, you can do a very simple exercise. I
Mm.
might have mentioned it before. And the exercise is to, while you're doing something else and you remember to do it, you just all of a sudden turn your full attention to the background sounds around you,
Mhm. Mhm.
not what's going on in the room, not what you're looking at, but you notice all of a sudden, the truck rumble out on the street, or
Mhm.
you notice a bird in the backyard, or you notice that switching of attention. It's usually from visual or internalized visual or even externalized visual. You're
Mhm.
usually doing something that involves your eyes a lot. But when you switch your attention fully into your hearing and to what's going on around you in the background, that movement of attention, if you do it enough and it slows down enough, you'll see that you're doing basically two things. One is you're pulling your attention off whatever it's on, and then you're going into an empty attentional space for just a moment.
Mhm.
And then you're reconnecting attention, but now through your hearing, to what's going on around you.
Mm.
And it allows you to actually have a moment in which you stop the whole internal discursive process
Mm.
and you can actually experience for a moment that change. And learning how to make that change is then can be brought to the other exercise. It's like
Mhm.
uh,
Mhm.
getting your attention off what you're usually looking at or paying attention to in someone else. It
Mhm.
might be they're talking, it might be, visually what they look like, and you get your attention on the quality of their field presence.
Yep.
Uh, the best way to choose a partner is the way most people don't know how to do, which is pay attention to their field presence. They
Mm.
may look great, they may dress great, they may talk great,
Mhm.
but what's their field presence like?
Mm.
Because that's what you really live with.
Mhm.
The rest of it follows that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but until you do the basics, like the redeployment of attention, and then start learning how to pay attention to what else is present with the human beings in the room you're
Mhm.
in, until you start doing that regularly, there's nothing else can be taught to you,
Yeah.
because you have to be knowing something about that movement and that way of perceiving.
Right.
And then someone who's kind of more practiced at it can actually give you more directions as to what to do, because you'll say, well, I notice when I do that redeployment of attention, X, Y, and Z happen. And then I could say to them, okay, pay attention to X, ignore Y, and then when Z appears, just stay with that. Okay, that because I remember when I had my first meditation teacher, he was an Indian philosopher who came to America, and it was back in 1966 or something. And he told me a basic process of how to meditate. I would go off and do it. Then I'd come back and talk to him and tell him what I was experiencing. Then he'd give me further instructions, and that's how it works. There isn't a roadmap, because any roadmap would be just a series of abstractions that would have no existential import for you.
Thank you. That was. It'll be fun to go back and listen again, because I think there are a number of layers to unpack in what you just laid out. There was one piece that caught my ear. It was in the midst of a number of possible steps that might happen as a person learns to deploy their attention in the way you're describing. And it was a moment of, I'm going to try and remember the words you used for it. It was being able to, I can't remember the words you used, but I'll give it my best shot to find some other words. It was seemed like you were inviting us to decouple ourselves from the automaticity of the ongoing chatter about what I'm seeing and what I'm interpreting about it and blah, 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 blah. You called it a blank slate or something like that.
I called it an empty space. Yeah.
Empty space.
Look,
okay.
Yeah. Look, you're right. But you see, the thing is, by just doing that exercise genuinely, you don't have to turn off the chatter. It'll turn off for a second. It just will do it. You don't have to do it. But in time, the more you do it, the more you notice how that chatter stops, and then you sort of get the idea of how to stop it. And it's not an active stopping; it's just a kind of a letting go of a type. So you can't stop it, because the more you try to stop it, the more it chatters. It's just what it is. It's like, when you're learning to meditate and you're sitting there and you go, "Oh, I'm meditating now." No, you're not. Because as soon as you do that, you're out of that. Yes. But the nice thing about that exercise, it just gives you a very brief moment where you can experience what it's like for the chatter to stop.
Yeah.
And then after a while, you can notice that when it stops, it's because you're doing something in that movement from one sense modality to another sense modality. So I would just recommend that people just do it a lot.
Great.
And if you're feeling really upset about something, try doing it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I know for my own timing, I never did ask you how much time you have, but I've got, I'm thinking maybe another 10 minutes or so, if that works for you. And I'm curious if we could find, if you would be able to find for us similarly an exercise, a way of deploying our attention that would have something to do with how can I discern what I call trust with another person? Or is there another way that's probably more accurate of what I'm looking for? Is there a state of being in myself that I can attune, or that I can bring more sensitivity to? Is
the answer is no.
Go ahead. Yeah.
The answer is no. No. When you learn, here's how I measure whether I trust someone.
Hmm.
When what they're saying and what their field says are congruent.
Hmm.
And you won't know how to pay attention to their field until you do the kind of things I've been talking about before.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I'm wondering, given you've had so much experience with such a broad range of humanity, I mean, from working with people who are exquisite seers and have these sensitivities in spades and so on. And then you've also worked with people who are struggling to just be even marginal in the world and are um,
I think
not,
the extreme end is Grafton Jail, built in 1890,
yeah,
and I had to go in there to assess, prisoners.
exactly.
And but no, some of them are exquisite people.
Mhm.
Some of them are not exquisite people, but
Right.
you know, you basically, you know, everyone. I guess I have one rule of thumb: everyone's the same until they prove they're different.
Okay. And could you just
Every
give,
and what I and For me, the same means everyone is uh, a total human being, totally capable of being conscious.
and totally capable
And
of being trustable at some level?
no, I don't really measure it in terms of whether I trust someone. That comes afterwards, and it only comes up if they're asking me to do something I'm not sure I want to do. If
Could,
they're not asking me to do anything, I don't worry about trusting anyone.
yeah,
I
sure.
just take them as they are.
I get that. If I could just ask you then, could you say a little bit more about just some examples of people that you can recall that were important to you? You wanted to have some relationship with them, and or you were assessing if you were going to continue to have a relationship with them. And somehow what their field expressed was dissonant, was in disagreement with what they said they were about. And could you
Yeah,
just
that
give me,
happens all the time.
I understand, could you just,
Just talk to a salesman.
okay, can you just pull that thread a little further so we can understand what's kind of stuff you're actually seeing when you're looking at their field and
Okay, when I remember, I was working in a high tech startup in San Francisco, and I was only there uh, about 4 or 5 days a month. The rest of the time, I was in Northern California, where I lived,
Mhm.
working remotely. This is before remote work was really big, but yeah, I really liked doing it this way. But I'd come down, I'd stay in a hotel in San Francisco, and I'd meet up with people in the company and do stuff we needed to do together, and
Mhm.
etc. And while one of the periods I was away, the uh, the chief technical officer, some guy who was finishing his PhD in theoretical physics and was very temperamental. He had a fit about something that was going on in the company, and he quit. And they advertised, and it was during that real intense growth period around 2000.
Mhm.
And they found someone else who claimed to do this, that, and the other thing. Uh, I think they checked out some of his references. I don't know. And so they told me, "Oh, when you come down, there'll be a new CTO." And so the executive vice president introduced me to him, and he started talking about what he's been doing, and his field was completely something else than
Mhm.
what he said he was. I mean, I won't go into all the details, but he was a criminal, uh, and uh, and I sat there, and then the senior vice or the executive vice president left, and he chatted to me for a while. And I said, okay. I went and found the executive vice president afterwards. I said, fire him.
Hmm.
He's not what he says he is at all. Nothing like it.
If I could
Well,
just
they
take a,
didn't fire him. They
oh
didn't
no,
fire him.
okay.
No, they didn't listen to me. I mean, I wasn't on the executive, was I? So basically, within a few months from then, he brought the whole company down.
Okay.
Uh,
Let me just pause you there, because that's a punchline of sorts, and unfortunate that they didn't listen to you. And I would just, for the folks who are watching this interview and have watched this series with you, I just want to recap just a little bit of what I'm hearing is that you have cultivated a number of different sense organs, if you will, in your capability, in your body, in your experience, so that you can sit down with a person and you are non-verbally in a using non-ordinary senses, if you will, you're able to get a very vivid, very detailed impression of some kind that communicates quite clearly to you. It's clearly enough that you then took that message to the other executives and they did what they did. Didn't do what they didn't do.
Nothing.
Right. And I'm just trying to speak the obvious here. I mean, it's obvious to you and me, and it might not be obvious to a person who's for whom seeing is a new thing, or this kind of sensitivity, this kind of perception.
Or an unknown thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So you've actually given us a couple of lovely practices that we can actually do at the most basic entry level of being able to realize sensations and impressions on our system that we usually either override or ignore or are unaware of completely. And you're giving us an opportunity to, in a quite a methodical, simple way, set up that two people standing across from one another, and one approaches the other and noticing and perhaps even sharing with one another. And that seems like it could be easily deepened as people, if they actually gave it some time and practiced it together. And so if we're coming toward the end of this particular interview, and you've given us a couple of these exercises that we can start to make this discernment and encourage some of these non-ordinary perceptions, is there anything else? I mean, you've also, just every time we've gotten together, you've given us a number of very practical notions.
You just have to start practicing.
Right. And is there any other simple practice that comes to mind when you look out ahead into what some of these challenges are that we're seeing globally? Are there any other practices, any other of these non-ordinary ways of
Well, for what
perceiving?
we're experiencing in the world around us that we can't do anything about, the best thing you can do is try to pay attention to what's going on, but also have some kind of practice for actually centering yourself, whether you call it meditation. I just tell clients of mine to go sit in a room by yourself and stay there for a half an hour, no matter what's going through your head. And when you come to that point that you all of a sudden want to get up and do something else before your half hour is up, pay attention to what was going on that made you want to get up. Because getting up and moving is one of the ways we obliterate our attention.
Yes.
So just notice when you want to get up and move and do something else. Oh, it's time for my cup of coffee, or it's time for this, or time for that. Now, see what that's like.
Mhm.
And just the reason I don't tell people to meditate, because there's a whole kind of cultural format around meditation,
Yeah.
which is completely extraneous to meditation. It really has nothing to do with it. But
Mm.
depending on what kind of meditation you learn, you get this whole cultural format. And I don't really want that's like extra baggage. And I don't want people to have the extra baggage. I just want them to sit there and watch their mind run.
Mhm.
And that's all.
Mhm.
And to try to just stay sitting there watching your mind run and see what it makes you do or what you feel you want to do. Like,
Mhm.
oh, I got to get up and do this now. Uh,
Yeah.
you backtrack then a little bit. What was I just thinking about? And you'll find that's very hard to do.
Mm.
And it's actually the basis of insight meditation.
Right.
And you backtrack and you go back to where, how'd you get to that point? And, from where you were thinking before, and all of a sudden you felt uncomfortable
Mhm.
or you felt deeply attracted. You want to just dive into that fantasy and be
Yeah.
there with that person or that object or whatever.
Sure.
And see what attracts you, see what frightens you, see what repels you. Just
Mhm.
try to stay with it enough to notice just one thing. It doesn't have to be everything all at once. No, it's not that movie. It's basically just stay there with it,
Yeah.
notice one thing,
Yeah.
and then the next day you'll notice maybe that thing again or something else,
Mhm.
and just keep doing it. A lot of what I'm trying to ask people to do is really simple, small things, but they have to do it a lot.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's not a weekend workshop.
Yes.
You don't come out of the weekend workshop, kind of seer master. No,
Yes.
you want to be a seer, well, or you want to have some of that capacity, then you do these things. And probably one of the things that makes a seer is some people tend to do those things naturally from childhood.
Mm.
I definitely did. There were things I did. I don't know why I was doing these things. I used to lie down on the couch in the living room, put my arm straight up in the air. I was lying on my side with my arm in the air. So if my arm fell, I was falling asleep. And so it would wake me up. And if I keep my arm up there and go in that in between state called the hypnagogic state,
Yes.
between sleep and wakefulness, I would notice all kinds of fantastic things would appear. And
Mm.
so I was experimenting with how to be conscious in different ways.
Yes.
And it's really all about attention. See, when you get that between state, your attention is out of the world, but it's still active and noticing the whole internal landscape, which
Mm.
then is bubbling with all kinds of weird stuff.
Yes.
And I'm not saying you should do that now. You could if you want to, but uh, what I recommended earlier is what will help open your capacity to pay attention differently. And that's really what this is about.
Yeah.
But there's no immediate lie detector, except the most potent one I've found is when there's a big differential between what someone is saying and doing, and then what their field says about them.
Mhm.
The kind of person who looks like they're laughing, but they're really very rageful internally.
Mm.
But they're doing jolly, but there's something not jolly about that person.
Yeah.
That's a very extreme example. So that's about all I can do in this format.
Yeah. I gotcha. That's really lovely. I got more than what I was hoping for out of our conversation, and it ironically, even though you perhaps thought I wasn't on that track, I have been so appreciative of every one of the exercises you've been talking about, because it is very clear to me that all of this occurs in our experience, in our bodies, and in
Mhm.
relatedness with one another. And
Our body, feeling, mind is
hmm,
what we're, or what the Tibetan Buddhists would call the mind-body complex.
hmm,
Yeah, and that's it. You're a mind-body complex. AI is doing one small part of that, does
hmm,
it much better than we can. Terrific.
hmm.
Well, not really in this, if it has to constantly make things up. But then again, there are a lot of people who are constantly making things up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Did you hear? Oh, well, maybe it's they want to put they want to broadcast the trial for the which one of Trump's trials. This is the one over January 6th.
Uh-huh.
And they want to put cameras in the courtroom, which they usually don't allow in federal trials. They're going to argue it because there's so much disinformation that's then passed on through social media.
Right.
They want everything that actually happened there, video available,
In real
anyone can
time.
watch it
Yeah. Yeah.
in real time, and probably it'll be put up on things like YouTube, platforms like YouTube. You can go
Right.
watch it,
Right.
but in real time, and it won't be edited, and we won't use high-powered techniques to
Hmm.
make someone say something they didn't say.
Yeah.
If you watch it in real time, and then you can record it yourself on your own computer, and you can
Yeah.
replay it multiple times and decide what you actually heard.
Yeah.
uh, I'll never forget once, I was doing counseling with a young woman years and years ago, and she made one of these classic slips that people make, it just, which is kind of saying the opposite of what she thought she was saying, but
Mm.
really at a very important, highly charged thing. And I said, "Did you hear what you said?" And she repeated what she had meant to say the first time.
Mm.
I said, and we had been taping this session because she wanted it taped. And I just said, "Well, no, that's not what you said. And here, I'll play the recorder back." And I played it back. I had to play it back 4 or 5 times before she let herself hear it. Wait. And when she actually heard it, she had a huge explosive tantrum.
Mm.
you know, because
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
you are trying to not know something and you finally know it against your will, it makes you furiously angry because you're really kind of knowing what you don't want to know. So I'm hoping that this real time stuff will
Mm.
actually kind of undermine a lot of the complete nonsense that goes on,
Yeah.
the lying and obfuscation and conspiracy theory making. Oh, yeah, that's another thing. I don't like conspiracy theory. It's conspiracy wacko idea. A theory is a particular type of construction in science that is a way of testing reality. There's no theory there. It's just
That's right.
it's a wacko idea.
Got it.
I'll leave you there, man. Okay.
Well, Dr. Peter Nelson, I just love when we get together. And as you know from my sharing before we got recording, that I've got a lot of life going on that I think is going to end up changing my availability to do this kind of interview and a number of other parts of my work. But that very last piece that you were pointing at is of great interest to me. What sort of armoring, what sort of membrane of resistance we can construct for ourselves so we don't have to feel the things we don't want to feel or don't want to believe about ourselves and so on. That's another that particular neighborhood is of great interest to me. So if you're willing, I'll keep you posted on how much time I've got and how much of this body of work I can keep afloat.
Yeah,
And
when you can,
I would so love to connect with you again, perhaps in a couple, 3 months or so.
whatever. whatever.
Great. It has just been a joy, and I'm so thrilled that you have had good results, good healing eventually with your surgery. And so, yay. And
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for spending this time exploring these non-ordinary realms. I so appreciate your
Well,
sharing.
I'm appreciative that that someone like you wants to bother. You know?
Yeah, I do. I very much
Okay,
do.
thank you very much for having me on. Okay, I'm going to sign out now. Cheers.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
In another episode of the Poetry of Predicament. This podcast is produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance. Living Resilience exists to offer transformative support and resources to the collapse-aware and collapse-acceptant communities around the world. Our sole purpose is to curate and offer coaching, support groups, courses, and events that assist people in expanding their core skills, competencies, and capacities for facing a troubled, predicament-laden, yet still ineffably miraculous world.